Hey there and welcome to AutumnAfar, and welcome back to those of you who have joined me before. As always, any of the links that I've used as part of my research for this video are going to be linked in the description box below, and I highly encourage you to do your own research and form your own opinions. Today's video is going to be about the history of travel. Like my video on the history of tourism, this is going to be an overview of the subject and not an in-depth account of every event to have happened through history. So this is going to go as chronologically as I can possibly manage. So it will start from ancient travels all the way up to modern times and the future of travel. So ancient travel. For anyone who went through the public school system like I did here in Canada, you likely learned a small amount about the early movements of humans as we currently understand them. Presently, there are no known surviving written accounts or records from this time. What we do know is that when Pangaea was still the only continent on the planet, migration was extremely common. This is based on shared genetic data that has been gathered from different areas. After the breakup of the supercontinent, people were still on the move. Many left what we now know as Africa, moving up to Europe, as well as to North and South America, through the Bering Strait down to South America. Some split off towards Asia, while others became seafaring and traveled from island to island for centuries. We know that Europe and Asia have a similar climate and are attached, so the east-west migration helped technology to spread in a way that it did not in North and South America. The first people in the Americas seem to have arrived anywhere from 20 to 40,000 years ago, but again, without any records or documentation, they may have been here even longer. We also know that somewhere in this ancient period, people started using carts and animals for transporting goods and people. So from here, we'll move on to travel in antiquity. Since I couldn't find a ton of information on ancient ways of traveling, I'm just going to move on to something that we do have a lot of records and documentation on, which is Greek and Roman historical transportation options. The Romans were prolific at building roads and expanding their empire. Many of the roads were rarely, if ever, repaired, as they were so well built and mapped out that it wasn't necessary. The empire at its height would grow up to 85,000 kilometers or 53,000 miles and would reach from the southern tip of Egypt's banks all the way up to what is now Britain's north. Even though there were advances in many forms of technology, the level of comfort, even for the wealthiest of travelers, was minimal, to put it kindly. The carriages and wagons had absolutely no suspension, so the passengers felt every bump in the road. They were also incredibly loud because of the iron wheels. They were so loud, in fact, that Rome banned them during the day because of the noise, as well as to ease congestion. They also traveled very slowly, and since they had no tops, the sun would beat down on those inside for the length of the journey. The speed that they traveled at would also be considered excruciatingly slow by today's standards. Most would be able to travel maybe 30 kilometers or so a day by land, meaning that if you wanted to go from Rome to Naples, it would take around 6 days. Rome to Londinium, what we now call London, would take about a month. Trips that we can now do in hours by plane or less than a day by car if you were to drive. The roads themselves were actually incredibly well made and very ahead of their times, and honestly, better than what a lot of modern cities have now, being curved so that the water would run into ditches dug on the sides, meaning that there were no puddles on the road. These roads were one of the keys to the expansion of the empire, allowing for quick transit for all kinds of travelers, including the military. Many of its roads also had tolls like our modern highways, which went to the government to build and maintain roads just like we do now. On the road, there were often inns at specified intervals. Many were wary of staying because the owners were less than honest. Many were frequented by criminals, drunks, prostitutes, and were often infested with lice and fleas and all of the rodents that they usually live on. The use of ships to transport goods and people also expanded during this time, thanks in large part to the vast size of the Roman Empire. It also shortened many travel times. as it was generally safe to sail because whole portions of both the land and water were watched by the military, meaning they were protected from pirates. They also built dozens of ports, most of which still stand today and have served the communities for centuries. And these ports were the reason that Romans were able to make regular trips to far-off lands like China, India, as well as the northern reaches like Britain. Just a side note for anyone who may be in school or is a little nerdy about history like I am, I found this really cool tool that allows you to see how long journeys around the Roman Empire would have taken depending on what route you took. So I'll link that in the description box along with the rest of my research. It was a lot of fun to play with, especially to see how long things used to take compared to how long they would take now. And it's a good reminder of just how fortunate we are with the advancements of technology. So travel in the industrial age. This most recent addition to how we travel is probably something that you've read about in history books and have almost certainly seen or experienced for yourself. When the Industrial Revolution first hit in 1760, we had to adapt how we transport both goods and people. Although they had been in use in mines since the 1500s, railways began to take over the transportation of goods and people starting around in 1804. When the first steam train was invented in England. By 1830, it could reach around 112 kilometers per hour or 70 miles per hour, which was much faster than people were previously able to travel in any other way. It was very successful and it was used up until the 1940s, when it was replaced by diesel and electric options, which were much less expensive and much easier to operate. I won't go too much into this one because I covered it pretty extensively in my history of tourism video, which I will link in the cards up here somewhere. When cars started to be mass produced, things changed again. Road trips took off around 1920 when cars became accessible to a broader number of people and people had more time off. Cars allowed people to go a further distance than a horse would in less time. This era also gave us terrible disasters like that of the Hindenburg. The Hindenburg was a hydrogen-filled blimp which killed 35 people in 1937 when an electric spark ignited, leaking hydrogen gas as its landing lines were being dropped in Lakehurst, New Jersey. What we don't talk about as much is what that loss meant. These Zeppelins had the first flight attendants. They flew for over 30 years, over more than 2,000 flights, without so much as an injury, and it was the fastest way to cross the Atlantic, and based on the photos available, it was pretty luxurious. Airplanes took over for what the Zeppelins were used for, and the first transatlantic flight started in 1936, taking off in popularity slowly. The journey was also much more comfortable by this point, having heating, padded seats. The cabin was also soundproof and pressurized in 1938. This is also a time that people point to when they talk about how much more comfortable flying was. The seats were wide, they had a ton of legroom, all the free booze you could drink. By 1946, there were regular flights from New York to London, and air travel, while still expensive, was more commonly accepted than boats, or even trains in some cases. Sadly for flight enthusiasts, the successor to the airplane was short-lived. The Concorde was an incredible advancement, but lasted only 27 years. The Concorde was able to fly from London to New York in 3.5 hours, a flight that now takes about 6 hours, if not more. The problem for most was not that there had been a crash. One singular accident that killed 109 passengers and 4 people on the ground. The aircraft suffered engine failure after debris from another plane that was not removed from the runway, which was supposed to have been cleaned, caused one of the left tires to burst. This in turn caused the fuel tank to rupture, and the Concorde went up in flames just 2 minutes after takeoff. The real issue for this supersonic jet was a round-trip ticket on this supersonic jet was over £8,000 per person. As great as it was, and as great as it would be, they priced themselves out of the market as most people were not willing to pay double what a first class ticket would be to spend less time on a flight. The Concorde was supposed to be the future, but at this point, it doesn't look like they'll be making a comeback anytime soon. So for the future of travel, so now that we've covered everything up to the present day, what could the future hold for traveling? Well, as people, we're not necessarily great at predicting. I mean, the Jetsons told me that we would have flying cars and I've yet to see one. Back to the Future said that we would have hoverboards. I don't have a hoverboard. Most of us probably would agree that we don't find the ancient ways of traveling exciting or revolutionary in any way, though many would agree that the idea of traveling between cities or even leaving the atmosphere to get from point A to point B is fascinating, if not a little terrifying. That's something that Elon Musk has talked about at length from various options with the BFR, big fucking rocket. Great name. Something that is not feasible and could kill passengers due to factors like G-force or the radiation people could be exposed to. So here's a rundown of a few other things we might potentially see in the future. Virgin Galactic will bring you to the edge of space for the bargain price of $250,000. If you're looking for something a little bit longer term, a few people have been tourists to the ISS, the International Space Station, for the very reasonable rate of $20 million. If those options seem like something too many everyday folks have done for you, try contacting SpaceX and see if you can be the second round-trip moon passengers. The first will be Yusaku Mizawa, a Japanese retail magnate who will reportedly visit in 2023. SpaceX is also planning to be able to send people to Mars as well, but there is no date set presently, and based on what I've heard, it will be a one-way trip. If you're a mere mortal like me, you're probably keeping an eye on something we're more likely to have access to. Take the Hyperloop, for example. Both Tesla/SpaceX and Virgin have a Hyperloop in the works, with Virgin calling theirs Hyperloop 1. The idea is to transport people and goods at over 1,000 kilometers an hour, making a trip from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, which currently takes around 3 hours, and make it less than 30 minutes. Or even New York to LA, which currently takes around 8 hours. With Hyperloop, it would be down to about 4.5 hours. Some of the mock-ups that have been made public include some where they have vehicles roll in, others have seats that you climb into, kind of like what you would see on an enclosed roller coaster. So there seem to be a few options being explored at the moment. While there are so many projects going on that may forever change how we travel, many are not public knowledge until they're closer to implementation. The future of travel is a mix between incredible advancements and a few curious suggestions. Think bike seats on a plane. The same could be said for most areas of our lives. And as things continue to progress and as things change in the world around us, the way that we travel changes too. So it will be incredibly interesting to see how this industry evolves over time, especially with the changes that are coming after everything that's happened in 2020 with COVID and all of the lockdowns that have happened and all of the closures that have occurred. Thank you again so much for joining me today. I really hope that you enjoyed this. I hope you found it informational. I had a wonderful time researching this, and I find it really, really fascinating to look into both the past and the future of travel to see just how far we've come and how much we really do take it for granted in so many ways. If you have any questions about what we talked about today or suggestions for future videos, you can always drop them down in the comments section below. You can also follow me across social media as @AutumnAfar. And remember, focus on where you want to go, not what you fear. I'll see you next time.